A hearty welcome to all our fellows of the World Academy, partners, friends, and guests for joining us for this conference and General Assembly. This event is likely among the largest gatherings of WAAS fellows in our history. We don't have exact figures, but at more than about 106 fellows will be speaking, and we'll have more attending out of the 130 speakers. I'd like to say a few words about the structure of the conference, and then we have a little surprise for you. In the first session, you're going to hear from 5 of the longest serving active fellows in WAAS, who will highlight some important threads of our collective institutional memory. Unfortunately, 3 of even longer serving members who we were requesting to join us were unable to do so. Eleonora Mastini, who was vice president of the Academy during the 1990s and is now approaching 100, still clear-headed and eloquent, but unable to connect from where she is. Augusto Forte, who is very active in the 80s and 90s. He had a medical appointment today, which he could not forego. And Federico Mayor, who was temporarily recovering from a recent illness. All of them were eager to participate. The second session, you'll hear from other fellows, relatively more recent members of the Academy, but who have been very active in the last 10 years, who will talk about the work that the Academy is doing today. We are going to talk now about what's happened in the past. They'll be talking about what we're doing today. And we're going to leave time open for an open discussion so other attendees can join and share your own insights and perspectives about the WAAS's current activities. And then in the last session today, we're going to turn from reality to aspiration, looking into the future. And we've invited a number of our most recently elected fellows to share with us their view about what WAAS should be doing in the future, share their hopes, insights, and vision of where we should go in future. And then again, we're going to open it up for general discussion, and all of you who were like to share your insights, we hope you'll have an opportunity to do so. This session is really just a long prologue for WAAS at 60. In the next 3 days following this, we're going to have 21 parallel sessions, 2 at a time, looking at different programming activities that we've been involved with up until now, or that we hope to be involved with in future. And on Friday, we'll have a General Assembly open to our fellows, not to the general public, and to partners and special guests, where we're going to first have a discussion among our fellows about how the activities and management of the Academy and seek your views on it. And then we're going to open it up to all, to the public as well, and all our active attendees, to talk about future programming, to hear your ideas that you've come out of this 5-day exercise about what you think the Academy should be doing, and about how we can build a more effective global network for promoting the goals that we all share. We've assembled here on the 60th anniversary of the founding of the Academy. But our main objective is not to commemorate the past. It's to prepare us for the future. Much has been accomplished, but little, I think we'll all agree, in comparison with what needs to be done. We have assembled here to look forward with the intention of advancing fast forward, faster than we have done up until now. But we feel it's important to do that we need to first reflect on where we've come from and how we got to where we are. because to fully comprehend the future, we need to understand the forces that are driving and propelling us and the world up to this point. Therefore, we're going to begin with a retrospective, a flashback on the founding and growth of WAAS. The video you're about to see is an impressionist painting, I would call it, depicting the social evolution of humanity over the past 75 years, compressed in time, accelerated in tempo, and combined with a somewhat chaotic complexity, just like the world we live in today. It also includes several milestones in the evolution of WAAS, which was born and grew up during this same period. It's very challenging to try to make out the cause of the zigzag patterns of history with its forward leaps, its sudden reversals and retreats, and the endless shift from one extreme to the other. Our minds are somewhat like a rearview mirror. We're pretty good at telling the story after it's happened, but very difficult for us to see even a step in front of what's going to happen next. Changes come very gradually often, but when they arrive, it's often very sudden. Like the atomic age that was born at the end of World War II, or the end of colonialism that virtually transformed the world in 15 years, or the end of the Cold War, which most of us have lived through, or the reunification of Germany, or the collapse of the Soviet Union, or the 2008 financial crisis, and of course, what we're living through today, COVID-19 pandemic. And yet, we discover, if we look carefully, that there are patterns and a direction to all of this crazy complexity if we look a little deeper than the surface movement. And that's what we're looking for in this first session, to make some sense of it, to peer beneath the surface and discover some of the driving forces that have brought us and are driving the social evolution today. As you watch in the next 10 minutes, I invite you to identify some of the hidden threads woven into the fabric of recent world history. When we possess that knowledge, we'll then turn to the future, to where we are today and where we want to go.
Become death, the destroyer of worlds.
They have made a beginning, a brave beginning that can build a mighty structure for peace.
In the dignity and worth of the human rights of men.
14th, 1947 symbolized the rebirth of a nation after the slumber of centuries.
Forward in sedate and sober strength, seeking no one's land.
In the Charter of the United Nations, to lift men everywhere to a higher standard of life and to a greater enjoyment of freedom.
Who owns the patent on this vaccine?
The people, I would say. There is no patent. This is... Could you patent the sun?
We have to learn to think in a new way. The question we have to ask ourselves is, what steps can be taken to prevent a military contest of which the issue must be disastrous to all parties.
Armaments and military equipment sent to Cuba are designed exclusively for defensive purposes.
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia,
Go. Jinsei. Go. Econ. Go. Surgeon. Go. Capcom work. Go for undocking.
It's one small step for man, giant leap for mankind.
people around the world are ICANN. And if you believe that we must end nuclear weapons before they end us, if you believe we can, we really can, we'll end this long nuclear nightmare through the power of people, then you are ICANN.
We're being brave.
Want to understand it together.
People, that is the fifth
world can do together.
Is one of the few NGOs that I
The organization we celebrate today emerged only after immense suffering. It took 2 world wars, millions of deaths, and the horrors of the Holocaust for world leaders to commit.
I'd like to start by giving thanks to a dear old friend, Sergio Scapagnini, who's also a fellow of the Academy, and his younger protege, younger but very talented protege, Raphael Rossi, who accepted a mission impossible. And Raphael probably aged a few years because he did in 7 days with about 4 days of work while he was carrying on his own other responsibilities. He produced this video for us, and we're deeply grateful to him for that. So thank you both gentlemen for your outstanding efforts.
There was my incredible pleasure, my incredible honor to meet you, to meet the story of World Academy of Art and Science, and also to trying to make possible this mission impossible. So that was the target. And I hope this is only the beginning of our, I can say, journey, collaboration, and story. Because I learned in this day that there is a lot of history and stories that we have to tell to the viewers. So
this is only a flashback to the future.
Thank you again.
Thank you to you all.
Grazie.
This work that they've done so wonderfully is not only represents an incredible passion of inspired art, but also the remarkable power to depict in 1,000 words in a single image. And I think this video really represents to us the insights of 1,000 pages of knowledge about what's happened in the last 75 years. We take a long time to arrive at it in any other way. What did we just witness? More than a dozen countless major themes of recent history, which many of us have lived through, all of them, or almost all of them, some of us more than all of them. The nuclear arms race and the movement towards disarmament, rising recognition of the social responsibility of science, peace and anti-war protests, the Cuban Missile Crisis. And incidentally, this was not just the story of the world, as you saw, it was interspersed inextricably with the story of WAAS, sometimes in the work of individuals, like as you saw, Jonas Salk, one of our early fellows who created the Salk polio vaccine, or of course Oppenheimer and Rotblat and Einstein and Russell, who were so intimately connected with the early days of the nuclear. But even after that, we showed the Cuban Missile Crisis. When I joined the Academy in '74, Harlan Cleveland was our president. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, when Dean Rusk was in the Security Council arguing that Cuba has Soviet missiles in it, Harlan was sitting in the State Department as Assistant Secretary of State. With one phone he was talking to Rusk and the other he was talking to JFK and passing messages back and forth. And many of our fellows have played an active role in different ones of these activities at one time or another. We saw the early beginnings of global governance, the vaccines, the Green Revolution, the birth of the environmental movement, the spread and of access to education, demands for economic equality, the dramatic contributions of science and technology from Sputnik and the moon landing up to the internet and the web, the birth of the civil rights movement from Gandhi's time to Martin Luther King to Nelson Mandela and anti-apartheid, civil disobedience, social movements, democratization, and so many other things. And these are facts that most of us are very familiar with. But also, if we look a little deeper beyond the surface commotion of these activities moving forward and backward and interacting with each other, we also see there are some deeper patterns or threads of history that are emerging, which I think are very important for us as we go forward. One, of course, is the shift of the world from being infinitely subdivided into being increasingly interconnected and networked, as we talk about all the time, more and more as a single, inseparable world community, mutually interdependent, united in a common destiny, whether we like it or not, or want it or not. We see the shift from the influence of powerful elites, that our story really begins with the story of Einstein writing to FDR, and then Russell and Einstein and Oppenheimer and Rotblat starting the manifesto that led to Pugwash and then to the Academy. But today, at the end, what we see is not so much the action of just individuals, but mass movements. The leadership seems to be passing from the distinguished, outstanding individual to more and more of the mass movements like Occupy, Black Lives, ICANN, Fridays for the Future. We saw the power of a lofty ideals set forth in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. At the time when no government was willing to sign on and declare this a law or set up any mechanism to empower enforcement of those rights, now, somewhat 65 years later, translated into the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals and targets, converted into concrete steps and actions that are to be taken. We saw the shift from authoritarianism to democratization, the end of colonialism, the end of the Cold War, the student protests, the growth of global civil society. We saw a growing demand for respect for diversity of all types, gender, racial, class, nationality. We saw from the leadership of a few to a swelling momentum of cooperative leadership and a universal human sympathy or symphony that seems to be swelling, giving some type of a hint of a global social movement that could come in the future. And if fundamentally we saw at the bottom, or as a connector for all of this, a fundamental shift in thinking that was there at the time the UN was founded, that the goal is competitive national security, each country trying to take care of itself, to cooperative human security, security for everyone. So these are some of the deeper currents that we'll be talking about, we'll be reflecting in the next 3 days, or for the next 4 days, and then coming back on the last day to look for some conclusions. We're going to explore all of these motifs in one way or another, searching for some insights that we can apply to put this backward look into a fast forward for the future we seek to create. I'd now like to open it up to my colleagues on the panel and start by inviting Ivo ŠLAUS, who is our honorary president and past president before that during a very critical stage of the evolution of the Academy. Ivo, please.
Distinguished participants, dear friends, it is an honor to speak at this session, and let me start just in the spirit of presenting our recent history, the history of roughly 60 years of the World Academy, so beautifully embedded in the world history. The contemporary world, many analyses show, is the best ever. However, this world is self-destructive. It will destruct itself in less than a day if we use weapons of mass destruction, and it will destroy itself in about 10 years unless we change our economic and political paradigms. Doomsday clock, which was introduced actually by original Pugwashites, shows now for the last 4 years that we are just barely 2 minutes to midnight, which is indeed quite shocking. And so when we discuss this situation, then let us remember that, of course, for the first time, we realize that this world is really joined together. As has been pointed out by Nobel laureates in the year 2000, the future of each one of us depends on the good of all, but that same thoughts have been uttered at the meeting of the World Academy about 40 years earlier, when Boyko said that mankind has become a whole and indivisible unit. The contemporary world is global, interdependent, and rapidly changing, and all of that is actually the result, to a large extent, the result of science. So what makes a big difference between what is current situation and what is the situation, for instance, at the end of the World War I, even the Napoleonic War and so on, and even the World War II, when we realized that the first task really is to establish UN. Now, actually, the first task is to have a strong World Academy. Might be a little bit strange how to mix politics and how to mix science together. Go back to ancient Greek and remember that the word idiotes really means a person who is not interested in politics. So politics and science are really deeply connected, as emphasized by Aristotle. Politics is a master science, and indeed it is. Now, a thought which actually somehow goes as a motto of the World Academy is the idea, leadership in thought that leads to action. However, again, this was said almost at the beginning of the Academy, when at the first meeting it was stressed, we need far-seeing statesmanship in cooperation with leading scientists. So these two connections are essential. So what do we need? We need public in general. We need scientists, artists, civil society organization activists. We need decision makers. All of this has to be put together. Unfortunately, of course, the value system of each one of them is strangely different. That is beautifully written, for instance, in a book of one of our fellows, John Avery, who wrote a book with the title Stone Age Politics and Space Age Science, or the essay written by another of our fellows, Donald Michael, who wrote the essay having the title Can Politicians Tell the Truth and Still Be Leaders? And of course, in a recent poll in UK, 62% of the British voters claim that actually politicians always lie. So unfortunately, this is the case. Now back again to the World Academy. Roughly about 15 years ago, the Academy started very active correspondence among its fellows. We met in various smaller meetings 2 or 3 times a day. We started publishing a journal, Cadmus, and as a matter of fact, we mark this year also the 10th year anniversary of the Cadmus. Then we started with another journal, Eruditio, and Proceedings of the Many Conferences. And the question that has been asked at that time, it was actually in an email sent on December 14, 1909, and the question was, should economics undergo a paradigmatic change? And the reply on all of these, from all of the correspondence was, yes, definitely. And then, of course, let me remind you that 4 years later, the famous sentence has been uttered, this economy kills. And 6 years later, more precisely on September 26, 2015, the United Nations General Assembly actually brought one of the most important documents, Sustainable Development Goals, Transform Our World. This is a unique case that the politics in power, and UN General Assembly is obviously in power, decides that to transform the world, to change the most profound changes actually that existed. The study by the International Science Council shows that the Sustainable Development Units are harmonious. Then we studied in WAAS and published it last year. They are harmonious, however, they are still incomplete. Not enough, for instance, is emphasized on peace, on elimination of weapons of mass destruction. So the first conclusion that World Academy came to is we do need to change the economy. However, the economy we have is really determined by the political system we have. This has been emphasized by Acemoglu, by Robinson, by several other outstanding scientists, and politics is actually there where is the root of everything, because the public has to trust those who are main generators of leadership that leads to action. And when you do all of these analyses, it turns out that actually the public in general trust science and scientific institutions more than anything else. It is essential that the World Academy is the academy where science and art dominate, both in number of fellows and also in the general worldview. Academy assures authority, reliability. Citizens have to appreciate that the World Academy is a voice of creative endeavor to overcome global problems and secure survival of humankind. This forms the future of the World Academy. it emphasizes that to survive in this world, we have to learn to think in a new way. This was again stressed by Nobel laureates, but has been stressing for roughly the last 10 years by the World Academy. That is promoting new paradigms in economic and in political, and emphasizing that these new paradigms have to be human-based and concerned with the existence of humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ivo. Thank you very much. Thank you for that background. Now I'd like to call on Alberto ZUCCONI, chairman of the board, and who saw us through some very exciting years in the Academy since he joined, almost from the day he joined, I think.
First of all, thank you again to the friends that make this beautiful video. I knew the facts, but looking at the video moved me to tears. Why? I think because I am, like you, feeling that I'm a citizen of this planet that is trying, notwithstanding all my limitation, to be part of the solution and not of the problems. That's really what unites so many people in the last 60 years to do the best for creating peace. Why? Because obviously we've been at war, not only with each other and different nations, but we've been at war also with ourselves, with our spouses, with our children. And we have been at war with every living organism on this planet. So much war that you see the destruction that we've been created. I think that this academy is very different from all the other academies, because has been from the very beginning very clear about wanting to be a network of networks and to bring all the stakeholders understanding that the old obsolete paradigm, mechanicistic reductionistic way of thinking, to let the people that know the side do not work. Actually, we need to be wise and so be humble and learn from our experience. Most of all, learn from our mistake. Even the video show actually many of humanity failures. What so are we all about? I think that really what for me tells all is that we strive to bring a sustainable present and future using the means that we have. What? First of all, a scientific understanding that started from some of our founders that we live in a relational universe. It's crazy to think that if we act on one aspect of reality, we would not influence everything else. Or if, and the COVID is showing, if we just think about ourselves, that we will not affected by what the others are doing or lacking to do. So understanding that everything is connected and that we are the summatory of a reciprocal influence. And so that our best interest is to have a win-win solution. And so equality, equal opportunity, and also to use our best means of learning and communication. What? Art and science. Art and science are the two main avenues for human being to be in touch with the experience of our adventure on this planet and to communicate it and to share it even to new generations that are not even born. Now, we have in this moment a great opportunity. Since the situation is becoming more and more clear how much serious it is, climate change, for example, still the richest countries on earth are underlining how big differences are in opportunity and chances. We have seen it, what happened just recently to the United States of America. Now, I think that here, in this very moment, the World Academy of Art and Science actually is present, not just by the Academy of Art and Science, but with so many colleagues and organizations that join us. We have so many partners, and so we do in very important, I believe, programs with the United Nations, for example, for the future leadership, sustainable leader, but we have so many organizations, and many would present their work with us and also independently what they do in the world. I think that the very rich opportunity that we have is to be always a network of networks, not so much teaching others what is the truth, but bringing people together in a safe, respectful place where we can share the learning from our mistakes of the past, avoid the future mistakes, and share best practices. Best practices that I think need to come not only in preaching to others what they should be done, but being able also to humbly see that sometimes we do mistakes when we relate with our wife, with our husband, with our kids. Let's learn from our mistake. And this is not only knowledge, is wisdom. So good luck to all of us and to the whole planet.
Thank you, Alberto. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to call on an old friend who first I was introduced to when he invited me to a meeting of the Nobel Peace Laureates in Rome in 2006, when he was at the early stages of the long association he had representing and assisting them with when Mr. Gorbachev was there and others. And you would have seen in the video a picture, or at least one or two pictures of Jonathan when he worked with us to organize meetings in New York at his offices and in the UN and in Washington on nuclear disarmament issues and the weaponization of outer space and things like that. Jonathan, please.
Well, Garry, thank you so much. And I want to thank everybody who's joined this. Not just join this with their intellects, but join this with their passion and their hearts. There are lots of national academies of science, but we are a global academy of art and science. And the highest art is the art of becoming fully human. And the founders of the World Academy emphasized this aspect of the human experience, our core humanity that brings us together. I want to just come back and take us back to, say, imagine yourself in 1643. You're in Central Europe. There's chaos. There's slaughter. There's passionate irrationality as to whose definition of Jesus' love is better. And Protestants and Catholics are killing each other over governance and meaning. And they're willing to kill each other because They're not afraid of dying because they're fighting for their immortality, their identity. Not for their survival, but for their identity, and they're willing to give up their lives. And there were thoughtful people in the early 1640s who thought, what are ideas that can take us from this conundrum of destruction? In Normandy, they didn't speak the same language as they did in Marseille. It took the Gutenberg press to create national languages. But between 1643 and 1673, you had the councils of Westphalia and the movement from an empire and city-states to the modern state. It was addressed to solve the dilemma of human beings on a course of destruction. We are similarly at a moment in history in which ideas truly matter, in which the processes whereby we seek security, whereby the primary institutions of our time are incommensurate with the problems that they face. Our economic order is based on perpetual growth without recognition of the regenerative processes of nature. The way in which states pursue security through militarism and national identity is incommensurate with the reach and capacity of our militaries to inflict destruction at horrific levels. The theft of intelligence and resources from the very existential human needs of billions of people in the pursuit of security through weaponry has reached burlesque proportions, to the point where, as we modernize our arsenals in order to pursue security, the more we perfect the weapons, the less security we obtain. So we're at a point in which good ideas grounded in the highest human art, the art of becoming fully human, have enormous value. And that's why the World Academy of Arts and Sciences is so important, because we are grounded in the technique and the tool of science and the art of recovering our humanity. And that's why we are at a moment in history where science has provided us the tool, the capacity to eliminate poverty, to protect the climate, to communicate globally in such a way as we can understand each other and live in harmony. Art, science, finance, commerce, fashion, pop culture, transportation, communication have all gone global. In the same way as the Gutenberg press allowed for the creation of nations, this device and the technology that we're using today provides us with the wherewithal to have a consciousness of our common humanity. But we need the ideas that can coordinate efforts and bring people together to do that. We breathe together, but we don't recognize it in such a way that we are dependent collectively on a third lung. 50 to 70% of our oxygen comes from phytoplankton. And yet we forget that. If I lost a lung or you lost a lung, we could survive. But if we lose that third lung, none of us survive. And we don't have a regime adequately protecting the oceans. And as we continue to burn the planet with climate change, we put that balance of alkaline and acidic at risk, risking the health of our third lung, the phytoplankton. So whether it's slow burn with climate change or fast burn with nuclear weapons, we know where the current paradigm of economics, based on the myth of perpetual growth, and the current paradigm of how we pursue security leads us, either fast burn or slow burn. And that's what comes back, that's what brings us back to our mandate from the very beginning of the World Academy. I remind you of what Joseph Rotblat, Albert Einstein, and Bertrand Russell said to us all when they saw where the capacity of the impact of science without values was leading. Here then, and I quote from them, "Here then is the problem that we present to you, stark and dreadful and inescapable. Shall we put an end to the human race, or shall mankind renounce war? There lies before us, if we choose, continual progress in happiness, knowledge, and wisdom. Shall we instead choose death because we cannot forget our quarrels? We appeal as human beings to human beings. Remember your humanity and forget the rest. If you can do this, the way lies open for a new paradise. If you cannot, there lies before you the risk of universal death." Our mandate as the World Academy is to bring the tool of technique, of the technique of knowing the natural world and manipulating the natural world that science provides for us, to become guided not by fear and false identities that we create, nations, religions, races, genders, as identities, as fixed identities over which we will fight, but to bring those tools into the hands of our common humanity and wisdom. There's no other group doing this. There's no other World Academy of Art and Science. This isn't a rehearsal. There isn't somebody else we can expect to do this. So I am profoundly honored to be able to remind everybody, in a sense, of our mandate. It's not something you don't know. It's sort of like our mother says, "Wash your hands." Well, we know to wash our hands, but we need to be reminded. We are gifted with organizational leadership and an organization with a task that is needed by the human family to bring the tools of science into the service, not of fear, militarism, and destruction, but into the service of the highest art, the art of becoming fully human. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, for reminding us to remember our humanity and remember why we're here and what our work is. And you've done a wonderful job of it. And our last speaker in this session, last but certainly not least in any respect, another old friend whose roots in the Academy probably go back further than at least any that I know of, because he's the protege of Harold Laswell, who was the president of the Academy during the 1970s and the president of the World University that the Academy set up and operated for some time. Winston, please. Winston was chairman of the board, apart from many other things, chairman of the board for 8 years and just recently retired from that position. Please go ahead.
First of all, thank you, Garry, for putting on this important panel. It underscores the belief I've had of the centrality of the message of the World Academy of Art and Science in some of the most important spheres of human activity. A few things I'd like to just mention briefly, if you like. I think the Academy underscores the principle of accountability, transparency, and responsibility. Those are important challenges for science and intellectual creativity. And those ideas represent the notion that we be receptive to new paradigms that cover the evolution of science and the humanities. And at the time when the Academy was a mere thought, Einstein, of course, sent his famous letter to Roosevelt warning about the possibility of the Nazis getting a nuclear capability. that resulted in the Manhattan Project. And what was interesting about the Manhattan Project was that once the bombs were produced, the scientists were cut out of all decision-making. They were left out. I was surprised at the casualness with which the military approached Truman, who had not heard of the bomb. And within a few minutes, Truman okayed it. I'm not quite sure whether they understood the full implications of the use of the atomic bomb on a human population, but the consequence was that about 80,000 people were killed in a minute in Hiroshima, and about more than 40,000 a few days later in Nagasaki. That seared the consciousness of the scientists, including Oppenheimer and others. And I believe that it was from that source of crisis that the Academy emerged with a really important formula to guide its activities. That is, we must be aware as scientists and intellectual creators of the social consequences and policy implications of all forms of knowledge generated by human activity. The central point is human activity is dynamic and creative, but it doesn't quite grapple directly with the issues of social responsibility and consequences. And that has left open something in our own discourse, namely the decision. How do you introduce those ideas into the decision-making processes that affect humanity? We haven't unpacked the structure and architecture of decision-making itself to give those principles a realistic focus. But those principles have guided us, and we've approached the issue of science with caution. Now, we do face global crises. The atomic bombs certainly have gone to hydrogen bombs and still represent the most important existential threat to humanity. And the critical question that we have is the question of an endurable peace and security for all of mankind for the indefinite future. That is one of the great challenges that we have. Now, I just add a few more things before I sign off. Jonathan mentioned the Westphalian peace, which essentially brought us a relatively imperfect but important innovation in the way in which sovereignty became the organizing principle of international matters. In a sense, the Westphalian peace, which gave us a multitude of sovereignties, was also instrumental in the organizing principle for the founding of the UN and the UN Charter. And the UN Charter has many Westphalian principles built into it, including their imperfections. So one of the issues that I think we still have to grapple with is the issue of global constitutionalism. Now, that's an abstract lawyer's thing, but the central point is I can't imagine any form of governance without some form of constitutionalism. And the UN Charter is, in fact, a constitution, but it is a weak constitution, and we should look to the methods of improving it. Its greatest weakness, I think, is the Security Council, where any one member can veto anything and peace is thrown out the window. So we've got to think about ways to reform the UN, and in particular the Security Council, possibly by adding a few new members, possibly by insisting that the veto be exercised by more than one state. But since security is at the heart of the UN system, it's extremely important that we consider reforming the UN Security Council, at least in modest ways that can at least improve the situation for human security. On the question of constitutionalism, well, that's the larger question of creating a global society and a form of global governance. But we haven't been giving the serious thought that we should to it. I'm not the originator of this. In fact, Laswell was the one that invented the idea of a global constitutional process. But we need in the future to be thinking about making it real. And finally, the role of WAAS in this kind of system. Well, my experience comes from the human rights sector, Amnesty International and so on. And what I experienced was that the civil society aspect of human rights is largely responsible for the greater acceptance of human rights and its legalization in some parts in most of the world. In other words, we need an active civil society to participate in that process of moving the human agenda forward. And I think we need to be thinking more about our role as an active participant in civil society, representing the intellectual and scientific community globally. Thank you.
Thank you, Winston, and I thank all of our panelists for reflecting back. It's a lot to take into our heads and a lot to try to share in a few minutes.